we can probably get started. Can go from there. So first off, thank you so much. Thanks for coming in for this session today. My name is Vidhya, and I'm going to be presenting about the quality maturity model. And the title actually says it's for driving excellence in high growth organizations, but it's a pretty generic model, and it could be applied to any scale of a company and any scale of a startup or wherever you find fit. So the intention of this presentation is to introduce the model and introduce the premises for that model, and basically to collect any sort of feedback that you'll have about the model as to if you think it'll apply to your organization, or do you see any shortcomings of any sort, and all of that. So with that, I'll get the thing started. Yes, there it is. So a little bit more about me. So that gives the premises of the model as well. So about 2 decades back, I started in as a manual test engineer in a company called Ericsson. So my first job was basically to put a chassis, route a chassis in, take it out, do it 100 times, and make sure that there was a fire somewhere in the lab, because that's what the customer saw. So from there, the organization grew to a point where it's practically impossible to keep doing this over and over, find the root cause of some incidents like that, and get into the automation world. So that's kind of how my journey went from manual to becoming an automated engineer too. And then that was about the first decade of it. Second decade of it basically was, yes, we've done enough of automation. That's when I've started looking into conferences like Google's test automation conference and a lot of other test automation conferences around there. So that's when they all started talking about something called productivity and developer productivity, engineering productivity. Those are terms that got very famous in the last 10 years. So that piqued my interest, and that's kind of where all of this started. So when people started talking about productivity, what all did they speak about? Where did quality come into the picture there? And how those two tie together is kind of where this whole model came into the first place. And a little bit more on the personal side, I'm a mom, I'm a podcaster, and I love gifts. So you're going to be flooded with a lot of gifts in this presentation, so please bear with me on that. So yeah, as I said, productivity became the best term, and I wanted to understand what they meant by productivity and how it applied to the organizations that I worked in. So basically, everybody wanted to move fast. That was the trend of the industry at that point in time. We're going to move fast was like the most commonly used words across the startup world and across the high growth organizations world too. But something that a lot of people did not speak about was they did not actually want to break things. They wanted to move fast. But yes, there is a very common phrase that says move fast and break things by Mark Zuckerberg. But no, they did not actually want to break things. But that was actually not factored into a lot of productivity talks that happened around the world. So this model's primary intention was to come up with how can you get sustainable efficiency gains in your productivity? And what does it take to do that? And I believe quality is the center of that sustainable efficiency gains. That's kind of where everything starts from. So, okay, so when I say industry reports and industry standards and all of that, where is all of this coming from? So the State of DevOps report is one of the most commonly used reports across the industry, and this is the most recent report. And you can look at it. Increasing the productivity and security are the primary goals of organizations around the world. And they create platform teams to do this. They want platform teams to increase the productivity, and they want to standardize the process. So both of this practically goes hand in hand. So what does a platform team generally do in organizations? They deploy stuff, they deliver stuff. That's the whole intention of the platform team. They have infrastructure and they help deliver stuff. So why are these platform teams talking about productivity? If they only care about the infrastructure, if DevOps is only about infrastructure, they don't really have to talk about productivity. But there are a lot of things that affect there. They have to scale their process by the scaling of the organization. They have to build, maintain a lot of process, procedures, workflows that help them deliver. So these are things that comes with different kind of best practices for different organizations, and there needs to be standards in place. So going a little bit further down into that report, the GitLab also produces this DevSecOps report that is a very interesting piece of report. And you can see trends going in these reports as well. So how does your team speed up the software delivery? So if you see the results there, yes, they all have a DevOps platform. That's what the platform team is. That's what the infrastructure team is. But The next four things here, the CI/CD, source code management, and automated testing, these are practically quality stuff. They are not platform or infrastructure stuff. Yes, your platform team can set up your CI and CD infra, but what gets into that CI and CD is a quality team's responsibility. And of course, source code management, how your PRs are getting produced, what kind of checks and test runs in that is also another thing that the quality team is going to be responsible for. And automated testing, by name itself, it's all us. So looking at all this, it gets to a point where quality is becoming the center of your delivery process. And I'll go back again. I gave up already. I gave in the surprise already, but two of these reports and most of the other reports, there's something that's common on these reports, that is how they measure all of the delivery process. And there are two frameworks right now in the market, like the model thought frameworks, and one of that is DORA. And yes, DORA is not this DORA, but it's DevOps Research and Assessment stuff. They define 4 key metrics for any delivering platform, so or a delivering organization. So how frequently do you deploy your stuff? What is the lead time for changes? How long does it take for any particular pull request to go from your developer's local development environment to the production? Is your lead time for changes? And when something wrong happens, how quickly do you recover from that wrong mode or a wrong space? And what is the change failure rate? So this, looking at 4 of this, it's like, yes, this is all about your delivery stuff, but practically all 4 of them have quality relationships to them. Your deployment frequency directly depends upon how confident you are about your deployments. And lead time for changes from my PR to the production, it totally also depends upon your test and the quality gates that you all have in place. And mean time to recover is probably not directly related to the test, but it's the feedback point for your test. So if I take so long to recover from a failed state, it means that I don't have processes or tools in place to recover from that state. So that also is inherently related to the quality. And change failure rate is directly proportional to how confident are you about your builds and what kind of bells and whistles do you have in your quality process. So this was the most commonly used one. And up until like last 5 years, most reports call out DORA because DORA is simple and it's visually you can see that, okay, I deploy so many times. So I have to have process that allows me to deploy so many times. And it's pretty simple to measure these things from a very high level perspective, and that directly supports the productivity of the organization. But recently, there was a change into this, and that's a new framework called SPACE. So well, DORA was exclusively meant for DevOps and the maturity of the DevOps in an organization, SPACE is a little bit more holistic. And this is when the whole productivity and the engineering productivity concepts came to existence in the industry itself. So going by the definition of it, it looks for satisfaction. Satisfaction basically is looking for metrics around how happy are my developers in my organization? Are they comfortable with the tools? Are they comfortable with the process that's there? Are they comfortable enough to be productive for my organizations? That's what satisfaction is. And performance is directly related to the metrics that you saw in DORA, that's the deployment frequency and everything like that. And activity is, you can imagine that as an artifact produced. What kind of deliverables does your development team have? It could be a deployment, it could be a document, it could be anything of that sort. What kind of activity happens? So what kind of productivity activity happens? And how are they comfortable talking and collaborating with each other? Those are the metrics they look for as well. And putting it all together for an organization, how efficient it is. So this is looking at it from a very, very holistic perspective, but both of this, and DORA, for example, actually is more prescriptive enough to say, like, these are the metrics, this is what you measure. But this one intentionally is open-ended because it depends on any organization that you are in, and how your organization measures it is completely up to you. But though this is a very good holistic framework, there is no way that you could have a tool that comes out in the market and say, okay, use this tool so you can measure all of these metrics for your organization. It's going to be very, very difficult to build such a tool. And even if there is a tool like that, it's going to heavily rely on your surveys and your developer participation in the survey. So we all know that's not going to be a consistent way to gather metrics. So Keeping these two in mind, though they are very, very good models to design or like have a North Star for productivity and all of that, we were thinking about why don't both these models actually directly address the quality in the process? And that's a major shortcoming of both these models. So, okay, so now that we already have these models that are very elaborative enough, why do we really need another model? Delivery is important, but so is quality. DORA can give you metrics that says you don't deploy frequent enough. DORA can give you metrics that says it takes longer to recover from an incident, but it doesn't give you the details of why does it take longer. We need some model that tells why does it take longer, and that quality becomes the center of those models. And yeah, as I said, productivity and quality always work hand in hand, and that's how it should be. So with that context, this is why we want to introduce this whole quality maturity model. So when we built this model, there were three basic principles that we wanted it to have. One is it needs to have a way that it supports the quality first culture in your organization. And it needs to be based on continuous improvement. We all know this is a big conference that can tell you why continuous improvement is important, because we've had people come and present different practices in quality. And that needs to be factored into any generic model that we build. And the key of all of this is the data-driven decision making. We need to have a model that fosters data-driven models. And that's the whole premises or the fundamental building block of QMM. And this should be, my gift, yeah, there it is. So this model should be within your SDLC process. This cannot stay outside. This cannot stay agnostic of the DevOps process, but it needs to be aware of what your SDLC process is and fit into that. That's a key of it. And you have to define a quality standard that's relevant to the org. What applies for an early growth startup will not be applicable for an enterprise customer. So you have to be having a quality team that has a thinking model that allows them to be flexible about what standards apply for your organization, what standards don't. But this gives you an overall thinking model in terms of dimension and maturity levels that you could go apply to any kind of an organization and make it flexible enough to fit it. And it has to be quantifiable because we want to foster data-driven decision making. So keeping those two in mind, we came up with, like, these are the two terminologies that you have to be aware when you're going to implement this model. One is the dimension, another one is the maturity. I'll go into the details of this, but the only two things that you have to keep in mind are these two. So yeah, first thing is dimension. Dimensions are basically areas under which your services quality is measured. I'm calling it as a service, but you can call it as a product. You can term it as the system under test concept. So that's what a dimension is. These are the dimensions that we will use to measure or evaluate the quality of it. And they are intentionally separated into two groups. One is the process or practice. Another one is the delivery perspective of it. From a practice perspective of it, that's what most of us are aware of when it comes to the quality lens. It's about different kinds of testing that we use at different levels. And these, again, are a little open-ended, but open-ended in the sense like I'm not going to be putting in your mutation testing or contract testing or anything like that, but they fit in a particular level in your SDLC process. That's how these dimensions of practices have come in. And delivery is a very important perspective of this model. And there are certain quality practices in delivery that you could use so that it enhances the confidence of the delivery. That's why we have observability here. We have operational resilience here. Some of this are intentionally broad and left open-ended because some organizations don't really need operational resilience, but some of them really need that the most. So you can prioritize between these dimensions, or sometimes you can even say, like, of these dimensions that we have, this doesn't apply to me at all because I don't really need a disaster recovery plan for my service. I don't need a disaster recovery plan for my product. So you are allowed to skip dimensions, and you are allowed to say, I will only do the bare minimum of this dimension to get to the maturity that I want for my product. And what are the factors? Why did we come up with these dimensions? What was considered when we came up with this? First one, as I said, the growth stage. There are too many dimensions, yes, but not all of them are applicable for you at the same time. You can start off with one dimension based on your growth stage that you're in. If you're a startup, you could just start off with say, I'm establishing a quality practice. I don't need to be worrying about disaster recovery right now. I just have to worry about, do I have enough processes and tools in place that does my CI level testing, CD level testing, and I'm able to release safely. That's the only thing my basic startup cares about. But if you're an enterprise organization, you care about almost every dimension in this. You care about, and you want to mature along those dimensions too. So that growth stage becomes a big factor for your maturity. Next one is the market pressure. How fast do you want to deliver things? What of these can you compromise? But if you don't have a list of things that's available in your tool set that you and your leadership can look at and say, okay, this is something I can compromise for this quarter and focus on in the next quarter or the next year, then it's going to be difficult to make decisions for you. So market pressure is definitely one of the big factors there. And your product type, as I said, there could be, when I mentioned in the slide about dimensions, I mentioned about the services, but yours might not be a service-oriented architecture. It could be a big monolith product. And most of these dimensions around release are applicable for service-oriented stuff, but some of this is not applicable for your product. So you could choose dimensions based on your product type. And funding. Funding is the biggest thing because not a lot of organizations have enough funds to support a quality team from day one. And even if they have, they'll only have 1 or 2 people in that quality team, and they might not be able to do everything in this dimension. So funding is a factor when you choose what dimension you want to focus on. And customer base. So that's a very significant factor here because your go-to-market strategy for any product will have a very good understanding of, okay, this is my set of customers. They care about the fact that I release this frequently, or they don't care about the fact that I release this frequently. Some enterprise really do not want frequent releases. They're like, don't bother me with your latest, greatest feature. I'm not going to be using them at all. I need stability in the way I use your product. So that is a very significant factor on how you define the quality strategy for your company. And scalability, again, it's company specific. Some folks have to, like some SaaS products really need to scale quick. And those products really need resilience, disaster recovery, and all of that. But some of them really don't need to scale that quick. They can go slow and cater market by market. So choose your dimension based on scalability of your product as well. And this is one of the key things. This is going and tying it back to the DORA and also the space models too. I can do any advanced practice I have. But if my customer sees an incident and there is an uptick of it there, nothing else matters to the organization. I don't want incidents, and you focus on quality based on what your incidents are. And this, I kept this intentionally as the last one because it takes immense work to convince your leadership to invest onto something like this. Quality always is looked as an investment towards an automated testing practice. But it's a lot more than that in this world. And they again need a thought model for making sense of this investment. So this becomes a bigger factor as well in this maturity. So I keep saying maturity and maturity, but I'm not defining maturity, and there is an intention for it. So it is left intent, it is open-ended for an intention, but we do prescribe some levels here. So again, this is meant to be very, very simple. So we give it 4 categories: bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. And it's the maturity in the progress as well. It's very close to how CMMI defines the whole maturity models as well. But this is more into the terms of practices, and it's not about the metrics itself. So bronze, you have to look at bronze in the maturity along with the dimension. As let's take static testing as an example. I will go through that over the slides, but I'll still give a very, very, very basic one. So establishing static testing as a practice itself is a bronze level for some companies. There's not a lot of companies that do static testing at this point. So that is a basic practices are in place. They're not always used, they are in place. When we want, we can use them. But silver is like consistently using those practices along your development process. That's the maturity growth here. And gold is advanced practices. Yes, I have a tool for static testing. What else does it do along with the static testing? What are the different kinds of static testing that I could do? And platinum is like, I don't want to use the buzzword, but I'll still use it. There are a lot of AI-driven tools that can do things for you. So, but that's an example of it. Not necessarily that AI is what gets you to the platinum. For an organization, it could be totally all right that running static analysis as part of your CI/CD system is the platinum. And that is up to the quality leaders for you all to define, and not for the model to prescribe. I cannot put up a model up here and say, only when you use AI, you are the most platinum user of the maturity. That's not what this model is about. We are going to give you a thought model, and we are not going to give you a more prescriptive model as do this and don't do this kind. So why is this customizable? Again, there's no one size fits all approach at all when it comes to quality. And I think I touched upon this a little bit earlier. It's about people in the quality organization know what to prioritize and when. And a generic model can only tell these are the dimensions in which your industry is looking at things, but not about this is the order of priority for you. That's not how the model should be. And it has to be flexible enough so the model grows along with your organization. So I can start as an early startup. I don't know what my customer base is. I can start with the basic practices that helps me deliver faster. But once I have the customer base, I need stability. So fine-tune your model to get it to a point where it's like, yes, I now have the basic practices in place. What's next? What is the next level of maturity for my company in terms of the quality? So that's what we want to do. But when we have this model adopted across the different places, you will start seeing industry level standards come out of this. So that's where the state of DevOps report is and all of that. So once they started adopting DORA and started measuring it, they were able to categorize those companies in terms of elite performers and standard performers and all that, depending upon the deployment frequency. So that's what we're aiming towards. We don't want to prescribe the numbers, but we want to prescribe the standards so that you can measure yourself within the company and outside the company. One service, another service within your company, or a similar company of your size is doing these things in quality. What are you doing? So those kind of industry benchmarking is also possible with the customization. So at this point, I'm going to try and give a little bit more insights into these dimensions. And again, our caveat here is that I'm going to give examples of how the bronze, silver, and gold is going to look like. It's not a prescription. But I'm not going to try and define what static testing is for you all, because you all know all that very well. So I'm going to look into the terms of business considerations, like why do I put static testing as a dimension here? And what is the, okay, I'll put this up in the slide so you can see for yourself, but what does an example of a bronze, silver, gold look like? So this is an example, this is not a prescription, just want to make sure that I put it out right there. So yeah, static testing. I'll say this, the first 4 dimensions are how you shift left. That's the idea of the first 4 dimensions. And the next 4 dimensions that you see are shifting right and left at the same time. That's practically in the middle of it. So you can see first 4 as the CI level one and next 4 dimensions as the CD level ones. So static testing is the most quickest feedback loop a developer can get about their product. So this is the earlier detection, and it improves the consistency of your code. And there are tons of static testing tools in the market, but most of them do a little bit more than the static testing. So that's where the gold and the platinum stuff comes in. So I'm saying bronze is like, yes, I do linting. I lint my code. That's my local development environment. What happens after I create a PR for this? I want to make sure that the linting works on my CI level too. So automatically analyzing all that in the CI levels. And the next is, do I have secrets in my code? Do I have to wait all the way until it hits my staging environment to find that? No, I can find that earlier on. So there are some tools like SonarCube. I don't want to mention the tools here, but I still do that for the sake of this example. They do vulnerability scanning in your CI. So having that in place is another level of maturity for your static analysis. And next is advanced tools. Advanced tools means like, I don't want duplicate code. I don't want unused code. All of this you can find at the static analysis level. And this is the most basic thing you could do to your code base. So this is kind of how the progression of maturity happens. Again, this need not necessarily be how you progress. You can definitely say that I want to say vulnerability scanning is the most mature I want to get at with this practice. That's good. That's definitely all right too. We're not going to force you to say You have to do all this possible. But think about it. Think about static testing as a practice that you want to follow and mature in that direction. So next one is unit and integration testing. Again, I'm not going to go to the definition of it, but business considerations of it. This is the first level of test that you ever write for your product. So we want to make sure that we consider this. And again, bronze to platinum, it's a slow progress. So we have basic test in here. This is the whole TDD approach. We have the basic test. Start measuring the coverage that you have in your unit and integration test. There are tons of tools that does that for you. Start measuring it. You need to know how much of your code is actually covered through your unit and integration test. That's a basic measurement. I'm not saying 50, 60 is good. I'm saying start measuring. Starting to measure along your measurement. And platinum says different techniques. Gold says advanced mocking. These are, again, subjective to your practices. You could use contract testing. You could use mutation testing. Doesn't matter. All you care about is, am I covering maximum code parts in my service? And am I getting that confidence I need in my unit and integration test? Because these all are going to run earlier on in your cycle. These are all before it hits your staging or your test environment. These are all available for developers to use in their local development environment. So mature along this direction. So have a thought put into unit and integration testing. Yes, quality as a team. It is generally considered that we don't look into the lower level testing practices like static testing or unit and integration testing. We are often looked as people who do only automation testing or maybe performance testing. But when you look into organizations' quality as a whole, these are things that we have influence over. We don't have to go write their test. We can say, this is what we want you doing at this level. So that's the intention of us thinking about these two levels. Again, I'm not going to describe what this is, but why did I put manual testing here in the world of automation testing? Again, as I said, these 4 dimensions are basically about what your developer can do before things gets to the stage. They have to be able to manually test their systems. They need to know what use cases they are writing their code for. So this is essential for developers to understand what user experience that they are providing. And it is also an important place to establish exploratory testing as a practice. So mature along this direction as well. So I'm at this point even putting out exploratory testing as a platinum because not a lot of organizations have a structured way to do an exploratory testing. That involves developers as well. Exploratory testing is not only for the QA engineers. It is a joint effort always. And that's what's going to make you deliver faster. One cycle of exploratory testing with developers is going to make them look at their code in a very different eyesight than what they will ever look at it before. So this is a usability issues concept as well. So once they use the product, they'll know how usable it is or not usable it is. So think about it. Think about manual testing way upfront too. And this goes hand in hand. And this is something I'm personally very invested in. And I consider this as the most difficult problem to solve right now. Yes, Agile is great. We all have to write requirements. Like as product owners, they are expected to write requirements. But go look at how many startups, how many high stage startups before they go to the enterprise level. How many of them do this? They don't do this. It's the most difficult thing for them to consist. Sorry. No, I'll try to run through it fast. It's already 10. Sorry. I don't. So I'll try to run through this a little faster. So use case documentation is the most difficult thing to get right for most organizations because it's difficult to keep it. I intentionally kept that live documentation as a platinum because it's very difficult to get a live documentation. You write requirements. There's not a particular team dedicated to maintaining these requirements. And your requirements go old, your tests go old, and nobody goes back and maintains those tests or the requirements. So that is a very vicious cycle. And this is a fundamental step for your next level of testing. If you don't have a proper use case documented, how will you ever know that if you're doing a system testing properly or not? So do that, mature along this direction. So you can slowly choose. Like now it should start getting a little bit more clear as like first 4 dimensions. A QA team is not the sole owner, but they are the influencer of those dimensions. But from here on, it is expected that you own your automation test and all that. Yes, there are a lot of different strategies that you could use, but system testing as is generally looked as something that QA should be doing. And manual testing before major releases, automated test for critical path, a regression suite, and 85% of use cases automated. It's surprisingly a number that most organizations cannot keep up to because of the dependency to the previous level where use case documentation is not really there. Next step is the performance testing. I'm not going to go into the details of all that because there's some things that I want to touch back in the later part of it. Again, the level of maturity for this is have a basic load test practice and do a regular performance test. That is a silver thing, but I've seen organizations that consider this as the most mature practice that they will ever have. Defining SLAs is very difficult, but once you start thinking around the direction of defining SLAs and what does that mean to your service, rest of those reliability metrics will fall in place automatically. So keep this early on in your CD so you don't have to think about it after the production release. And have a stress testing, have monitoring and predictive analysis. This slowly gets into the model of AI stuff, but continuous monitoring is something that's easy to do. Most tools give you free of cost and build the monitors and alerts in place. So you don't really have to go to the level of AI to get platinum, but it's the most easiest practice for performance testing that you could ever do and get the feedback live from the production. Security testing, this is also a very key thing. A part of this was already done in the static analysis through vulnerability scanning and all those stuff, but do more regular stuff, do more container level scanning. I'm giving container scanning as an example because of a service thing, but do more cadence-based penetration testing, have secure code practices in place that you constantly keep checking over and over in your CI and CD systems. And threat modeling. Threat modeling, there are a lot of tools that automate the whole threat modeling checking part. And there are also a lot of tools that specifically are involved in continuous security testing. That's like how frequently can you attack a container and all of that too. So keeping security testing as something that a quality team looks into, and the frequency of how much you do security testing is something under the purview of quality team, is going to be hugely beneficial when it comes to looking at the vulnerabilities that you found in a product after it gets to the production. Okay, so that is the end of the practices of it. So what different kind of practices you would do? So again, as I said, intentionally skipping out things like contract testing and mutation testing because those get into the lower levels of unit and integration testing. And you could do different levels of risk analysis, risk-based testing and all that, but they all come into the broader bucket of system level testing. So what kind of sub-practices are applicable for your organization is for you to choose. But these are the dimensions that you would, or the buckets that you would put them into when you think about those things. So now that you have done so much to ensure that there are so many practices in place before you release, what can you do about the release safety? So this I'll go a little bit more details into because this is one of the fundamental blocks of the next steps. And release safety basically just focuses on what are the ways of releases that we have so that we can ensure that there is the maximum confidence in the one that you're releasing. So it minimizes the risk, and I'm going to go through this one by one. So bronze is basic deployment checks. It's like this is mostly applicable for companies that do deployments, let's say once a month. You have the liberty to do manual deployment checks. Are my configurations in place? Are my secrets in place? Am I doing the right set of release checklists that I have? Those things are possible for not so frequent releases. But once your frequency of releases increase, you need to mature along this direction. So you have automated deployment pipelines. And these automated deployment pipelines having some of the previously described testing practices like system regression testing, continuous performance testing, and all that is a good first step to start. and then something called a blue-green deployment and automated rollback. Those are two prescriptions again, but I'll touch upon a little bit there. So blue-green deployment is you have an active cluster, not a cluster, let's say you have an active product already that's running up in the production, but you have the new release coming up. Without disrupting that active product in place, just deploy your new release into another different infrastructure, run all your tests there, make sure they're all good before you make that switch over. So that's a release strategy that you could use. An automated rollback, once your test failed, automatically roll back the change that went in. So that's again considered as most mature because then it's also most disruptive. And again, canary release, feature flags, automated verification, all of them are maturing along the practices you have for release. So this is the first step towards your delivery process. And once you have delivered, what happens? You should be able to observe them. That's what most people call it as testing in production right now. But this again is something that quality team needs to have a good understanding on. So why am I more interested in logging and monitoring right now? Because my system test or my regression test fail. What is the first tool I will use to debug it? Yes, I can look at the logs of the test, but how will I know what part of my system failed? I rely on the logging and monitoring that my service gives me. So do I have enough logs and monitors in place? That's the very, very basic thing. So you have a centralized logging. Do you have basic alerting? Sometimes it's not a test failure. Sometimes it's a little bit more than a test failure. And sometimes it's a symptom of it comes through tools like Sentry and all of that. Do I have those basic alerting in place? Do I have tracing in place so that I can step through each and every path that a particular code is taken so I can know where it actually failed? And advanced alerting is through having patterns of alerting and anomaly detection and predictive analysis. Again, that's the AI part of things. But logging and observability and us being comfortable with the observability of the system is a key factor as well. And the next one is, okay, everything is in production. I know where the logs are and all that. What can I do next? I said the basic thing was to look at the alerting. And some of you folks were there in the chaos yesterday. So failover processes. Again, basic failover process is something that could be a most mature thing for a lot of products too. But considering a SaaS product, having a failover strategy is the bare minimum. So what happens if one of my region in AWS fails? Do I have a plan to switch over? Do I need my entire DevOps team to be in place to do that switchover? Do I have to have everybody on call to do that switchover? And that's the process part of it. Can I auto failover? And auto failover, I'll probably not take the example of AWS. Database is something that most of us are familiar with here. So there are situations where the primary election of a database happens live there. Sometimes the primary gives up and there is a re-election of the primary. What happens then? What happens if the database is not able to re-elect a primary? You're stuck in there. Can I automatically fail over to a different region? So those are all operation resilience stuff that you should consider. And self-healing systems are partly related to the auto failover stuff as well. That's something we call as a degradation modes. Once you have the degradation modes defined, you can self-heal in terms of like you can auto failover to a different region or a different zone in itself so that you can continuously service your product. So, and again, chaos engineering practices are gold. And sometimes due to the maturity of the tool itself, it can go to the platinum. And auto mitigation strategies, again, combined to the observability levels as well. Again, this incident management, not going to define it. But yes, basic incident response. How frequent are quality teams involved in the incident responses? And even when they get involved, is it like, what do you get out of that? Do you understand the root cause? And do you go feed that back to the system of tests that you have? And those are questions that you should be asking in the incident management level. And what are the escalation procedures? And how involved are you with the post-mortem of those incident learnings? And how do you incorporate that to the process? And data-driven incident prediction is a bit more advanced. Companies like Google and Netflix do that a lot, where they know and they trace it to the every PR level. So they can say like, if there is a PR that's going to happen in this subset of source code files, they can give you the metrics about these are the incidents that have happened on these files. And keep this in mind when you're doing changes to this files. That level of predictive analysis that they are doing, but again, that's the most platinum level. But quality being in the incident management is also something that we need to be more of an advocate for. Disaster recovery is very closely tied to the resilience part of it. So basic backup systems and regular disaster recovery drills. So this is something that we all spoke in the chaos session we had yesterday. So companies like Netflix, Google, they all do disaster recovery drills automatically. They don't really have a push the red button thing or something like that. So they constantly keep doing this. We have to document the disaster recovery procedures because not always you have a fresh infra team or somebody joins fresh to the team and they go on call. There's a chaos happening. They need to know what the procedure is. And as a service owner, or as a product owner, you need to know what your disaster recovery procedures are. An automated failover, RTO basically is how much data can you afford to lose? How much time can you stay in the broken state? That's basically what RPO and RTO state is. And multi-region setup, continuous disaster recovery testing, all of this is the maturity direction around the disaster recovery. And it's very, very closely tied to how chaos testing happens. Secret management. So why is this a delivery thing? And why is this not a practice thing? So it involves some infrastructure stuff. That's why it's in the delivery side of things. And how you store, how you back up your secrets, how centralized is your secret management system is a key factor of all your security related incidents for any company. So having a centralized secret management system and having a way to automatically rotate secrets at particular cadence is considered as the most advanced technique right now. So having access audits, having automated rotation, all of this is the directions to which you will go towards. But the very basic, there are still startups who don't consider encrypting passwords. That's normal. And having an encrypted storage of secrets is like the bare minimum. You need to do this. And having this as a checklist item is like, okay, I need to remember to do this at every point in my service. Configuration management, again, I can give you a very interesting example of this. There was a huge roadblocks incident earlier this year, and also the CrowdStrike thing. All of these are all byproducts of how configuration was not managed properly. They did not anticipate a blast of rollout for something that they changed because of the configuration changes. So track those configuration, terraform it. And infrastructure as a code is something that we all have to adopt. And again, this gets to the point of I need to be a DevOps engineer to understand all this. No, you just have to tell them that how do you change your config? How do you validate or how do you test your changes to configuration? Do you have process in place? Do you have practices in place for that? That's what this is all about. I'm just giving example of infrastructure as code on all this. This will be a byproduct of it, but the process-wise, it's like, do I consider configuration changes as a change? And do I do the necessary change management practices for all these things? That's what this is all about. I think this is the end of all the dimensions. And I'll run through the next few slides and then I will stop there and you can take all the questions that you all have. And as I said, this was made flexible so it can suit all that you want to do. So you can either roll out one dimension at a time. Don't necessarily have to do all the 14 dimensions that we have prescribed here. Do one at a time, mature there, and then do the next one. Or focus area-based rollouts. If I care a lot about
Hey Vidhya, sorry we are not able to hear. Still no.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, it's
Oh,
good.
it's echoing. Is it still echoing? Yes, it is. Oh, sorry. How about now? Should be okay now. Yes. I can see me getting picked up. Yes. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, I'll not go into a lot of details of this, but yeah, a little bit of this. This is a very, very early on case study that I did with this model. This startup was fairly new. They had 2 quality engineers and they were just getting on with it. And security was a key factor. And because they were at a point where they wanted to get more customers, they did not want incidents and they did not want support escalations because they did not have a support team to cater that escalations. So their short-term goal was this, to get to the bronze level, at least for the 10 dimensions, and get the silver level for the security-related dimensions, reduce the bugs, improve the customer satisfaction. So yes, they did not achieve any of this in 6 months. They had to go a lot more for that, but they were laser focused on security stuff. So they went into the point where they were gold there. Gold there meant that they were automatically rotating the secrets because that was the key factor for them. And they did really good with all other dimensions. Performance and observability was a difficult challenge for them to solve because we were just 2 QA engineers trying to do all the other things. We were not doing any performance testing. We just had a performance test in place. We did not do anything more than that. So, but they did get to a point, but they got to a point where they had 40% reduction in the critical bugs. This was predominantly because they had most of the CI steps at the silver level. They were able to get quicker feedback about whatever they were doing. And they also took the feedback from incidents and fed it back to the system. So this increased the customer satisfaction scores. We did measure it because incident management also measured the support escalations that they had and the satisfaction that they had on the product. So this measurement helped in there. So this is one example. Another higher growth startup example is this, also probably a little bit older. And here they wanted to get next level. They want to get silver in the dimensions and they wanted to go gold level in the release safety because they were going very, very fast. And this was also for one of the federal customers. So the release safety was extremely important. They cannot afford to break anything there. And they were very, very particular about the configuration management stuff. They had a lot of deployment related incidents because they were not running system tests or automated system tests anywhere. And they wanted to increase the development velocity. This was a very interesting goal that they had. Probably also because they were not doing a lot of CI-related practices, and they want to maintain the growth rate by improving the stability. That's why resiliency was very important for them. And this is where they were. Again, it was 6-month goal, but it went on to a 12-month period because maturity takes a lot of time. But they did amazingly well with the release safety. They had all kind of blue-green. That's where I actually learned a lot of blue-green deployment practices and all that too. And they had feature flagging system. They ensured that they were actually having most mature practices in place for releases. And they did also have a continuous deployment practice. So they did extremely good configuration management system because they had a new infrastructure team that practically did infrastructure as code from the scratch. So they were able to focus on what had to change, and they went through a process of configuration management too. So This one, they were at bronze for all of the CI related practices. Secret management went to gold as well because they did a lot of secrets, secret detection stuff in the CI level. They did a lot of unit and integration test practice, very good integration tests that they had. They had mocks and all of that in place. So the velocity improved, and they did not have deployment related incidents. Actually, it says 60%. It was, when we were measuring, it was almost about 80% reduction in the deployment related incidents. So a summary of only on that. I'm sorry, I'll just quickly go through it. So focus on specific dimensions is the key. It's prioritization based on your organization needs, and long story short, maintaining this maturity status is a lot of work. So shortcomings, this is where I would love some feedback on. It might not be a one size fit all. Where do you think that something is missing here? What problems have you seen in here? All of this is something I would love some feedback on. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all. Thank you. Sorry, I went in too late.